was what the Nazis did evil or not? Because those are the alternatives. And if it wasn't, it's like, okay, well, you can move ahead on that presumption, or you can accept that it was evil in a transcendent sense, because that's what the Nuremberg Trials were about. And then the terrible implication of that, in some sense, is that if evil genuinely exists, then its opposite genuinely exists.
Everybody says Nazis are bad, far left to far right. And if you believe in existential good and evil, then there has to be an existential author. There just has to be.
This one says, was what the Nazis did evil? So this is going to be some maybe objective good and bad.
Do we believe in that or not?
Well, I think there has to be objective morality. Doesn't there?
Well, that's certainly what Solzhenitsyn thought about the Nuremberg Trials, is he believed that the fact that the Nazi atrocities were regarded as wrong, independent of cultural context. He thought that was a signal achievement of the 20th century, because it reestablished not so much the existence of good, but definitely the existence of evil. And that was something I found unbelievably convincing, because I thought, well, you've got a real conundrum here. It's like, was what the Nazis did evil or not? Because those are the alternatives. And if it wasn't, it's like, okay, well, you can move ahead on that presumption, or you can accept that it was evil in a transcendent sense, because that's what the Nuremberg Trials were about. And then the terrible implication of that, in some sense, is that if evil genuinely exists, then its opposite genuinely exists, because it's not going to exist without its opposite. And so as soon as you accept the reality of the evil of Auschwitz, you're in a metaphysical world in some sense, because you have to simultaneously posit the existence of a transcendent good that's at least the opposite of that. And part of what I've been striving for 40 years, I would say, is to identify what is the opposite of the spirit that produced Auschwitz. And some of it Solzhenitsyn detailed out so nicely. It's the spirit of truth, and Frankl, it's the spirit of meaning. And I think you can make a strong case that it's the spirit of love, and it's some amalgam of those three things, and that doesn't exhaust it. And it's the spirit of play and voluntary association and freedom, all things that are stressed in the biblical narrative.
Okay, so there's a lot in those clips, but they touch on several things. And one of the things that, for me, that jumps out is that typically from like an apologetic standpoint, you always hear about the problem of evil. How could a good God allow there to be evil in the world? And I think they get into that in another episode, but this is kind of like the precursor to that, because it kind of turns it on its head. You have the Nuremberg Trials, and they're saying what happened was evil. Well, then that has to then get measured against. So actually using evil to talk about and prove like a transcendent good, because if there is something that is purely objectively evil, it has to be measured against some objective morality of goodness, right?
Yeah,
and that's
sure.
kind of what they're kicking off here, and they're kind of talking about
Well,
that.
and what's interesting is, again, in our culture, everybody says Nazis are bad, far left to far right. Everybody says Hitler is bad. You've gone, you start down a path. If somebody's like, you're worse than Hitler, which is kind of dumb, because are you really worse than Hitler? But, people say that kind of stuff. And it's become universally accepted that the definition, I think like Star Wars. I mean, clearly the stormtroopers in the Empire are modeled after Nazis, the way they march. They just, in our culture, they've come to be the picture of evil, which frankly for me as a Christian is problematic, because it's a materialist view of evil. I think a more full view of evil would be to think about the spiritual forces that inspired the Nazis, that there's something even more evil than them that inspired them, but that's maybe a conversation for another day.
There was clearly something going on in the 20th century.
Oh man, it was a mess. I think something happened in the 19th century, mid to late 19th century, rolling into the early 20th, which Nietzsche, who, I don't often cite the atheist, but he's a smart dude. And, I disagree with his foundational, but the fact that that's a clever act of mind is undeniable. And he pretty well forecast the 20th century, because he said, we've killed God, and, all the world can't soak up the blood. that's going to be unleashed because because that's what happened. We spent the 19th century and people like Darwin but you end up with this movement and they just systematically assault the idea of God in the marketplace and in government and in culture. And they spend a lot of time just shoving that aside. And you're not cool. You're not intellectual. You're not whatever if you think this way. And then I think the 20th century is when we reaped it. So then you have the ascent of communism, which is clearly atheistic. So all the tens of millions of people who died in China and the millions of people who died in Russia, under Stalin and Mao. You get all the people that died in Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge. You get Hitler, who's not a Christian. Some people want to sort of argue that Germany was a Christian country at that point. They clearly were not. They're the first truly anti-Christian.
They had their edited Bible. Their Bibles were edited
to take out love,
and had new stuff about Hitler in it.
Yeah, so they're clearly anti-Christian, and we reaped, the harvest, of removing God from the public square. I think Nietzsche was right in that. So yeah, something was happening. And then that evil that was unleashed, we all recoiled from. We were like, whoa, 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 whoa. And so then they talk about the Nuremberg Trials. You could talk about Stalin as gulags. You could talk about, again, Auschwitz. I've been to Auschwitz. They're talking about a heavy, dark place, man. Auschwitz is rough. And no one thinks it's okay. But what they're getting at is, well, then why is it not okay? Why do we all recoil against it? Why do we all say it's bad? And I just don't think that atheists and materialists have a good answer. They can't answer me why it's bad.
Yeah, man, it's just universal subjective morality. I'm just kidding.
It doesn't make any sense.
That's an answer.
Yeah, so it's universal and subjective. That makes so like if you think it is outside of space and time, it doesn't matter what culture, what time in history you're in, because this is the thing. People are like, oh, morality is just cultural. Like that was bad 1,000 years ago, but it's okay now. That doesn't make any sense. So you're telling me that you could conjecture a place in the future or the past where, again, raping and killing, little girls for fun was good. That's a good thing to do because of the culture you're in. I don't believe that. I don't think there's any place in history or time when Auschwitz is okay. So that's capital E evil. And if there's capital E evil, there's capital G good. And that's kind of what I think they're getting at, is like that there's something going on here. And if you believe in existential good and evil, then there has to be an existential author. There just has to be. Otherwise this is all garbage we're making up.
And I think one of the reasons why I feel like Jordan Peterson is popular. Well, I mean, there's many reasons, but he doesn't really get so much into he does touch on the theological, but he always pulls it back into this psychological. And then rather than saying the objective truth from God, he does say God, but he says they always say the transcendent.
Yeah.
And the transcendent for maybe someone who's not thinking theologically can come from lots of different places, but ultimately it does come from outside. Has to come from outside ourselves, but it's wired. I think it is wired into us psychologically somehow, and I think it's really fascinating. They talk about that. They talk about the transcendent so often throughout here. Yeah. And the thing I love about these discussions is like, you've got these theological guys in there. You can tell that this round table is filled with people that are thinking theologically. And then you have people that are thinking narratively. You've got people like Jonathan Pageau, he's like thinking narratively, but also like
sort of visual,
mythically and symbolically, which for me, I mean, I know maybe for
no, but he's a real believer.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say for someone who maybe grew up in a more, traditional Christian background, maybe that is a little bit like
weird.
Yeah, it's worrisome. It's like, wait a second. Are they getting off the reservation right now? But for me, I think there's biblical truth works across all of those.
Yeah,
it's like every layer. It's just another layer of truth, which is super fascinating.
I've heard 3 or 4 people in recent months talk about coming to faith because they stared at evil. Exactly what these guys are talking about, that they saw things happen. They were like, I know that's evil. And they're just exactly what they're saying. And if I know there's evil, then there has to be good. And their coming to faith story involves that. I just think it's incumbent upon us to be the people that know there's something beyond this world and we're willing to risk ourselves to do good and right things, to play our part in that, if that makes any sense. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, click like and subscribe. It really helps us. And if you really enjoyed it, go on over to our website, thelandinthebible.com, and become a supporter. It helps us generate more content and gives you access to our full library of video and Bible study content.